Hallo und herzlich willkommen zu einer neuen Folge bei 99:1 Meets Radio Kawsachun Coca beziehungsweise Kawsachun News hier aus dem Tropico aus Cochabamba in Bolivien. Ja, ich befinde mich hier mit keinem geringeren als Ollie Vargas, einem der beiden Mitbegründer von Kawsachun News. Das Interview wird der Einfachheit halber für ihn im Folgenden in Englisch geführt werden. So right now I'm going to change into English. It's a huge honor to interview you, Ollie Vargas, Bolivian British journalist here in the radio Kawsachun Coca, co-founder of Kawsachun News, who did a great work in the resistance against the Agnes dictatorship, the woman who, kind of autoproclaimed herself as interim president of Bolivia after the coup ousted democratically re-elected President Evo Morales back in November 2019. Ollie, why did the Bolivian people elect Evo Morales in the first place back in 2005 as first indigenous president of Bolivia?
Thank you for this interview. The Evo Morales' first electoral victory in 2005 was the product of years of social movements that were fighting against the latest phase of neoliberalism in Bolivia, coming out from the struggles in this region, the tropical Cochabamba, against the presence of the DEA, the US, intervention in this region. There was the other struggles in various urban areas, such as the struggle in Cochabamba against the privatization of water, where they privatized water and the price instantly tripled, a rise of 300%. So there was mass movements against that. There's mass movements then after that against the privatization of natural gas. And although they were, not all at the same time, they brought together the historic demands of Bolivian people around, ending poverty, ending the enormous inequality, rising out of the underdevelopment that Bolivia has always suffered, and correcting the historic injustices around the exclusion of indigenous people from public life. So all of those struggles and all those demands came together to be able to elect Evo Morales, and it was all those demands and struggles that built the movement towards socialism as an organization, as a coalition of social movements in Bolivia.
Thanks. So some years after the first, or let's say during the first presidency of Evo Morales, they called, a constitution assembly in order to refound Bolivia towards a plurinational state with natural resources like gas being nationalized. Can you tell us a bit about the process, how it took place, and how they refounded Bolivia with what are the most important parts of the new constitution of the plurinational state of Bolivia?
That's right. Part of one of those historical demands that I was mentioning was as well building a new basis for the country, and that means a new constitution. Throwing out the old constitution of the capitalist period and bringing in a new one, and it was a process, it wasn't something that was written overnight. It was a process where there was a constituent assembly with representatives from social movements elected, and they drew up collectively. The president of that constituent process was Silvia Lazarte, which was a union leader in this region, in the tropical Cochabamba, and she led that process. Of course, it was a collective effort, but she was at the head of that process, and that is incredibly important for Bolivia. That one of the people represents the sectors most excluded in society before Evo Morales was now in charge of one of the most important processes of the past 15 years. So that was an incredibly important moment, and among the the clauses that are in the constitution, as well as recognition and respect for indigenous rights, is also the clause that says that natural resources belong to the people and can't be privatized. And to privatize would be an unconstitutional act. It's something to guard against the looting that there's always been, even if there's to be a change of government. So that forms the basis of Bolivia as a country. The politics of state, you could say the politics at a fundamental level. This is not just change that comes in because there was a change of government, but a much more long-lasting change.
Yeah, maybe you can tell us a bit about the economic success of the Bolivian productive social communitarian economic model, which was designed by the current president Luis Arce, ex-minister of economic and finance.
Yeah, Bolivia was, for most of its history, the poorest country in South America, the least developed country of South America, and within process of just over 10 years, Bolivia became the fastest growing economy in the region. Growth rates of between 5 and 7% year on year for the last few years of Evo Morales' government. And that was the product of, first of all, the nationalization of natural gas, and that provided the income for the government that was necessary for it to invest in other things, such as infrastructure, roads, something that practically didn't exist in Bolivia before. The country was just not connected. It's simply not connected. Where it was dirt roads. Building proper roads, that's something that boosts economic activity in an incredibly important way. It means you can get products to market, you can move goods around the country. That's a massive boost to the economy. They could build things like schools, hospitals. Under Evo Morales and now under Lucho Arce, every week they unveil a new school or a new hospital that's being built. Where would you get the money for that if it wasn't for the gas? Because the general taxation of the population could never work, because in Latin America, like all of the global south, the amount that you can collect from tax is quite limited because, well, there's not very many high earners in your country. Those that are high earners are not that high earners compared to some of the super rich in the global north. And the general population, the majority, works in the informal economy, things that are not registered and therefore not taxed. Informal markets, things like this. So it'd be impossible to. If a state had to rely on taxation to fund its social programs, it wouldn't have social programs. There wouldn't be the money. That was the position Bolivia was in for most of its history. But that nationalization, not just of gas, of lots of other services and strategic industries, allowed the government to have enough funds, enough resources to then launch these development projects.
Awesome. Another central pillar of this government was the Indianization of the state and the implementation of the Suma Campaña, the Bolivian version of the Viva Bien, led by social movements, and it's the current vice president and ex-minister of foreign relationships, David Choquehuanca Céspedes. What do you think of it, and what's the paper social movements played in this implementation of this Andean indigenous philosophy?
It's another policy of state, something that has been brought in to be a long-lasting fundamental change. Because before the current constitution, the Bolivian capitalist state was built on the Western model, on the sorts of constitutions brought down from North America and Europe, the sorts of constitutions that most capitalist countries in Latin America have. It wasn't fitted to the realities of people's culture, of people's way of life, at least not for the majority. So bringing in this vision, this integrated vision, is not, of course, an invention of the current government. It's something that goes back millennia. But recognizing its place in politics and the state is about that process of transformation. That includes the new constitution, that includes the nationalization of natural resources.
Yeah, Western philosophers like Slavoj Žižek, for example, always name Bolivia and the process of change under ex-president Evo Morales as the example of a successful left-wing government due to the tripling of the PIB, of the brutto internal product, due to the reduction of poverty and along many other measures. What would you consider as the biggest success of this process of change, of this transformation of Bolivia towards a plurinational state and a really working, functioning sovereign national state?
Well, the success that that Bolivia has had has been an all-encompassing one. It's successful because all of the most basic needs of the country the state had begun to tackle it for the first time. You know, as I said before, things like the need for a new democratic constitution that recognizes the rights of the majority for the first time, the nationalization of natural resources, which is the only thing that can provide the government with the means to actually build the state, to build society along the principles that have always guided it. So one element without the other wouldn't work. I don't think you could build a genuinely integrated and developed economy in the way that Bolivia is doing without the political side, without the new constitution that enshrines the economic model, without the victory of the movement towards socialism and the way that it transforms every institution of the state. If the institutions were still stuck in in the old period with right-wing parties, with those who don't share the values of the process of change, all the rest of it wouldn't be possible. So it's when you go to the level of defending the process of change, then you have to have all of those principles in mind. So the most important task is to understand how Bolivia has got to the position it's in, and to defend and to advance the process. Because of course the process is not a fixed thing, it's not something that's been done already. It's something that every day can be deepened, developed, to a much greater extent.
Yeah. In the year 1985, under President Paz Estensora, I think, there was the decree of relocalization of the mining sectors and the capitalization of many state-owned mining companies, which led to mass migration toward big cities, to the region of coca growers in Yungas, and this region, the Tropic of Cochabamba. So many miners migrated here as well. Right now, maybe our audience listened to there's a lot of noise because a national mass conference is going on. And interestingly, with this migration, a huge migration of knowledge, of syndicate formation, of socialist ideology took place from the mining sector towards the cocalero syndicate sector. How would you consider the influence from mining unions and their legacy for cocaleros nowadays and for Evo Morales and the process of change?
Yeah, before the cocalero movement, the most powerful section of Bolivia's social movements was the miners and the mine workers, who built powerful unions that led the struggles always against the neoliberal governments and against the military dictatorships, against other right-wing governments. I'd say it's probably Bolivia in that period, with the mine workers were among the most organized and the most radical almost anywhere in the world. Years of mass strikes, uprisings, but all of that head of the movement was cut off in 1985 when they closed the majority of state mines, nationalized mines. There begins Bolivia's neoliberal period, and it caused tremendous devastation. People were, from one day to the next, suddenly had no job, no income. Of course, the country was in the deep economic crisis. There was no other, forms of employment around, so people had to migrate, to abandon their homes. Places like North Potosi, Oruro.
Your father migrated from there, right?
Yeah, my father's family from Unsera, North Potosi. And like the majority of the town to leave, they went to the city of El Alto. Others came to this region, to the Tropic of Cochabamba, and just here in Villa Tunari, about 2 hours in, there's also a town called Unsera, and next to it, Yayagua, which is the town that's next to Unsera and Potosi, because they're all people from there, ex-miners who came into the jungle with just a machete, and they had to make a living, find a way to make a living in an environment they didn't know. And it's an incredibly heroic story, but I think it's also not something of mere historical interest, because, as you said, they brought those politics that they had in the mines, they brought it here. So this is where you have the fusion in the movement towards socialism of that indigenous, campesino, rural worker ideology, way of doing politics, combined with the traditional socialist, traditional left forms that were present in the miners, in the mining areas. Places like Unsera and North Potosi, is the Communist Party of Bolivia was the most important among miners. There are other groups as well, but those politics were mixed with the campesino, indigenous outlook, and that created a fusion that is today the movement towards socialism.
Yeah, if we regard the collective memory or historic strong movements in Bolivia, we could consider 3 types of movement. One, which is like the large memory, the anti-colonial indigenous movements from the 500 years of the long night of San Juan, the anti-colonial resistance, then the national revolution from 52, and the anti-neoliberal movements, which you just mentioned, which emerged after they closed the mines. Evo Morales was able and capable to unite them behind the mass and his party. What consequences does this have, and how would you consider this dynamic to have all those 3 historic, long, midterm, and short memories being united behind one party and movement?
I think the movement towards socialism, like every left party that's able to have some level of success, that's able to organize the majority of people and maintain that energy and momentum, is partly because they are, the memory of the working class and the social movements. They bring together all of those experiences, the victories and the defeats, the lessons of the defeats, the explanations for the victories, and fusing all of that together is, without that you don't have a successful organization. An organization is never going to be able to reach that, and it has to be the experiences of the majority of the actual people as they are, workers, campesinos, whoever it is, those popular sectors. It has to be able to encompass and experience those, encompass and speak for all of those experiences, not just presently, but the historical needs and demands as well.
Very good. Can you explain us how Evo Morales and the campesinos were considered as revolutionary subject after the closing of the mines, because they emerged, and how Evo Morales became the unquestionable leader of the workers and campesino movement in Bolivia?
Yeah, as we mentioned, there was a process where many came to the countryside, brought with them a certain way of doing politics, traditional left socialist traditions. Out of that, in this region, the Tropic of Cochabamba, is where people, Evo Morales and others, but with Evo Morales in the leadership, decided that you can't go on forever as merely as an oppositional group, as a movement that only mobilizes at times when your rights are being violated. They decided that there needs to be a more definitive solution. The solution is to take power. But how are you going to take power? You need an instrument. People didn't want a party, because parties are about people from above coming down to below and asking for votes of support. This had to be an organization of the movements to enter politics through a vehicle of their own. So that's why the political instrument was proposed. And a lot of people disagreed, especially people who supported other parties, more mainstream parties. And there was a big, years of arguments and debates within the movement about that. And it was won. And Evo Morales took that argument to around the country, outside the region, and through that was able to build alliances. All of the most important social movements, indigenous groups, unions, and that was the way in which the movement towards socialism could be built. As I said, not as a party, but as an instrument for people to act on their own terms.
Yeah, really interesting what you mentioned. I mean, even at the current mass conference, they're debating the estatutos, and you can see it's like a really organic syndicalist campesino party, because like even the estatutos, like mentioned, you have to be like union leader or dirigente. Anyways, how would you consider the role of social movements and syndicates in the party?
It is the party. You can't join as an individual. There's nowhere to, pay, fill in your bank details and pay a monthly fee. The only way that you are part of the movement towards socialism as an organization is through your union, or social movement. And that's why sometimes in the city, some more middle class people have to create groups, sort of citizens groups, with which they can, affiliate to the mass. And the most important groups out of that is the one, the ZU, which is the Campesino Workers Confederation, the Interculturales, which is another indigenous campesino confederation, strong especially in the east, in some places like Santa Cruz, and here in the tropical as well, and the Bartolinas, which is the Indigenous Women's Confederation. Those three form the basis of the movement towards socialism. There are lots of other groups as well in there: Conamac from the Andes, CIDOB from the indigenous people of sort of lowlands and Amazon areas. The main workers' confederation, the COB, the COB, is not part of the movement towards socialism, because they have a policy of not affiliating to any political party, because they're the organization of all Bolivian workers. But they are considered within the fold of the process of change, and all of the leaders are a part and considered as well leaders of the movement towards socialism. So all of that unity has been the key to success, and it's they who decide, who goes as candidates, who goes as who becomes politicians, who becomes leaders, who becomes presidents. So that's without that, there's nothing. There's no movement towards socialism.
Yeah, right. In 2019, a right-wing military coup took place. After accusations of fraud made by the American Organization of American States. How did Bolivia come to that point? How was it possible that the right was able to destabilize the country? How were the dynamics in mass media and social media working in order to make the military to ask Evo Morales to step down and to use arms against the people who were protesting against the military coup?
Yeah, it's the process of creating the conditions for a coup to take place was started with protests, right-wing protests by small, middle and upper-class groups that became more and more violent as each day passed. With that violence, burning people's houses, attacking people in the streets. Through that violence, there was just a general atmosphere of chaos created, just chaos. And in that chaos, there's the opportunity to create power vacuums, and then to fill that, the military comes in, and that's what happened after 3 weeks of really violent protests by the far right opposition. The military comes in and say, for the good of the country, to stabilize, to bring back social peace, Evo Morales should resign. So the protests were used as an excuse, as a ladder for the military interest, the political interest to swoop in and take power undemocratically, because of course they didn't win an election. Henny Nanya's has never stood as candidate in a presidential election. She became president. Her party got 8% of the vote. Is that a democratic way of choosing a head of state? So that was how the coup was able to take place, how it was able to take place so quickly. And of course, this violence was something that was fed by social media, fake news on WhatsApp and Facebook in particular. And all of that contributed to whipping up anger, hatred, racism, which were the necessary ingredients to launch the right-wing protests against Evo Morales.
Yeah. Interestingly, there was, before the election of 2019, a very long campaign to discredit the election, to create mistrust against the electoral process. And this was quite easy for the right to use the discourse of democracy, given the fact that Evo Morales had lost the referendum of 2016 about his repostulation. What do you think? What were the fundamental mistakes of strategical way Mas and Evo Morales did back in the years from 2016 to 2019 to kind of leave the door open for this dynamic?
Well, my personal opinion, there was a level of naivety, you could say. It was assumed that because Evo Morales had delivered a growing economy, stable democracy, that things would always remain that way. Through the popular support alone, the government would, the process of change would continue, and it turned out to not be the case. At the time of the 2019 coup, Bolivia was the fastest growing economy in the region. There wasn't any inflation or any of the legitimate reasons for people to come out and protest. So how did they manage to do that where there were no legitimate demands? They were able to, as I said before, whip up hatred on social media, fake news, whip up racism, and through that, the doors left open. And it was never there. I think people didn't think that it would ever happen. People saw these fake news campaigns, saw these campaigns of racism and violence as the screams of a sort of belligerent child, because the Bolivian right were a very small minority. So they'll never take power. It's fine. And that was the reason that the police and military were never really mobilized to quell the protests as they perhaps should have been. I think certainly more could have been done to counteract the attacks by the right in the media and social media. A greater solidity, to consolidate the security forces as at the service of the people, and not institutions that could be bought off by right-wing interests as they ended up being.
So why did the military coup took place? Which role played right-wing ideology inside military and corruption in the police when the police and military intervened in the constitutional order in Bolivia?
Yeah, the police in Bolivia, doesn't have a particular ideology. They're historically extremely corrupt institution, and they were the ones who made the coup possible, because there was the protest, and then the police mutinied, and that's, it was just after that the military steps in. But it was the police mutiny that made the coup a reality, really, rather than a threat. So the role of the police was crucial in the coup against Evo Morales, and they did it not for political reasons, but for reasons of corruption. Fernando Camacho, one of the main leaders of the coup in Santa Cruz, he said publicly in a leaked video, celebrating after the coup, saying, "My father was the one that did the deal with the police to make sure they wouldn't come out and quell the protests that we were launching." So there was, an offer made by the right-wing coup forces, and they switched sides from one day to the next. It shows, of course, the failure of the Bolivian government to really implant a sense of democracy, a sense of national dignity within those police forces. Otherwise, they wouldn't have turned their guns on people for a few pennies, which is what was being offered. So that's something to reflect on. Something to reflect on. The military as well, I think, is a much more complicated institution, because throughout the last year, I'd say large sections of the military were still loyal to the mass. It was a divided institution. There was lots of divisions. There were right-wing factions. There was pro-mass factions. There was sort of more neutral, apolitical factions, and there was a constant tension there within that throughout the last year. Even here in the radio, there was a good relationship with certain military commanders, with certain military sections of the military, that would, work with social movements, let them know what was going on within the military. And that was incredibly important last year. And the military is not a single block that turned to the right. It turned to the right, and then it was immediately all the top brass was replaced. Agnes put in new generals, new commanders, and they tried to restructure the military, but they weren't able to. In less than a year, it's not difficult. So now, that process of restructuring has gone into reverse. All of the generals that were promoted under Agnes have now been, most of them are in jail now. Those who aren't in jail have been, demoted at least. So this could hopefully be the beginning of a process to refound the security forces.
Yeah. When Evo Morales took power in 2005, like the years before, there were 5 presidents in 3 years, and huge mass protests, which got literally massacred by police and armed forces, and social movements had a certain strength out of the necessity from people to organize themselves and to protest for their necessities. In the end of 2019, Evo Morales' government were kind of disconnected to certain sectors, especially ordinary people in El Alto and confederations in the Department of La Paz, who didn't immediately go out to protest against the, let's say, ongoing coup of false fraud accusations. But after the coup took place and police and right-wing protesters burned the indigenous huipala, which is an official state symbol in Bolivia right now, millions of people spread out into the streets and went not just into resistance against the coup, but as well into resistance for the respect of the huipala, for respect towards indigenous women in their traditional pollera. How would you consider this dynamic? What does it reflect on the popular sentiment of ordinary Bolivians with their indigenous identity?
Yeah, absolutely. The burning of the huipala flag was a watershed moment where everyone who had their suspicions about the right realized the true character of Bolivia's opposition. when they said that, you know, we won't bring back the racism, the hatred, the economic collapse of the neoliberal period. Well, the burning of the Wipala flag just hours after the coup made it clear what was already going on. So the majority of people saw that and could identify what the Bolivian right were, including some of those who would be confused or were not totally clear on that. It was a visual representation of what the coup is, what the coup represented. So it was a clarifying moment in the struggle. Now it's taken on an extra meaning, I think, an extra layer of meaning. It's become truly a symbol of anti-colonial resistance, not just in Bolivia, but around the world, in Peru, in Chile, in Ecuador. Of course, it doesn't belong to Bolivia, it belongs to all of the people of the Andes, but it symbolizes that struggle everywhere. And I think it's taken on that meaning in a particularly strong way since the Bolivia coup, since the fight to defend the Wipala.
So thank you very much, Ollie Vargas, for the time you had spent with me during the interview. I hope you guys enjoyed this interview as well. You can follow our channel, subscribe to 99 zu 1. Sometimes we're publishing interviews in English as well, but usually it is in German. That was everything I wanted to say. Just thank you to the Radio Kawsachun Koka, who gave us huge opportunities in order to make great interviews, who supported the documentary I'm currently supporting too. Revolution of the Wipalas will be coming out soon. And I hope you guys just enjoyed the interview. Follow Kawsachun News, support them, especially their Twitter game is really awesome. Guys, you can support our channel at 99 zu 1 as well, a little German left-wing media project. I hope you guys enjoyed it. And right now I'm going to change into German. So, vielen Dank, liebe Leute, für die Aufmerksamkeit. Ich hoffe, das Interview hat euch gefallen. Und wenn ihr Fragen habt, stellt sie in die Kommentare zu Bolivien. Ich bin mir sicher, ich werde in die nächsten Wochen nochmal die eine oder andere Folge zu Bolivien und dem Prozess des Wandels hier machen können, solange ich hier bin. Ja, außerdem abonniert unseren Kanal, teilt die Videos. Und ihr könnt uns außerdem natürlich auch unterstützen. Ich habe mir die Reise hier selbst finanziert und auf Patreon und die ganzen Links findet ihr in der Beschreibung, wo ihr spenden könnt. Ja, ich hoffe, es hat euch gefallen. Bis zum nächsten Mal. Grüße aus Bolivien. Euer Anton von 99 zu 1. Macht's gut.
Leute, wir brauchen eure Hilfe. Und zwar als allererstes, folgt uns bitte überall, wo ihr uns folgen könnt. Wir sind auf YouTube, auf Facebook, auf Twitter. Wir sind jetzt mittlerweile auch auf Twitch. Gebt uns
Instagram.
Instagram sowieso, genau. Gebt uns dort einen Follow. Liked dieses Video bitte. Überhaupt jedes Video, das ihr euch anschaut, bitte liken. Warum nicht? Ist doch einfach nur ein Klick da. Damit helft ihr uns ungemein. Wenn ihr uns abonniert auf YouTube, klickt auch die Glocke. Dann werdet ihr immer informiert, wenn wir live gehen. Dann könnt ihr dazukommen. Je mehr Leute live mit uns unterwegs sind, desto besser sind dann auch die Views und desto besser ist das für den Algorithmus. Wir haben außerdem ein Patreon-Konto.
Genau. Patreon.com/99 zu 1. Wenn ihr so richtig dabei sein wollt, könnt ihr euch ein Membership-Level aussuchen. Wir haben 3 verschiedene Stufen. Es gibt dann solche Sachen wie zum Beispiel diese neuen Nachspielepisoden, wo wir jetzt die erste gemacht haben. Und ihr habt auch Zugang zu unserer Discord-Community. Weiters haben wir einen paypal.me/99 zu 1 Link. Falls ihr denkt, naja, sind schon schnaffte Typen, aber mehr als einmal will ich nicht zahlen, dann könnt ihr uns da auch ein bisschen Geld schicken. Wir haben tatsächlich inzwischen relativ signifikante laufende Kosten, weil wir einen hohen Qualitätsanspruch haben. Insofern, wir sind wirklich auf eure Unterstützung angewiesen an der Stelle.